This is TTS Times Wire News, providing fast and efficient narrations of the latest news articles for those on the go. We upload every weekday at noon Eastern Standard Time. Be sure to like and subscribe. Time Magazine. Time.com. Companies are embracing empathy to keep employees happy. It's not that easy. By Helen Petersen. July 22, 2021, 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Empathy is one of the values we've had from our founding. That's what Chelsea McDonald, SVP of People and Operations at Ada, a tech startup that builds customer service platforms, told me when we first got on the phone for this story in June. When the company was in its early stages, with about 50 people, empathy was a bit more ad hoc, because you could bump into colleagues at lunch. But that was pre-pandemic and before a hiring surge. Now, McDonald says, empathy is built on communication, as many as 5 times a week. She communicates in some way to the entire company about empathy, through tools, specifically, one that tracks whom people communicate with most and who gets left out, through intimacy, cultivated through special interest groups, and through transparency. Senior leaders share notes after every meeting. At various points in our discussion, McDonald describes empathy as more than just, hey, care about other people and making space for other people to make mistakes. She was one of a dozen executives whose communications directors reached out when I tweeted about the office trend of empathy. Adriana Bocalherda, the chief people officer at the software company Pegasystems, told me about the 3-hour virtual empathy training session the company had created for managers, and how nearly 90% had joined voluntarily. Kieran Snyder, the CEO of Texttospeech, a predictive writing company, said the biggest surprise about empathy in the workplace is that it and accountability are flip sides of the same coin. We had an engineer give some feedback that was really striking, she told me. She said that the most empathetic thing her manager could do for her was be really clear about expectations. Let me be an adult and handle my deliverables so that I know what to do. All of these leaders see empathy as a path forward after 17 months of societal and professional tumult. And employees do feel that it's missing from the workplace, according to the 2021 State of Workplace Empathy Study, administered by software company BusinessOver. Only 1 in 4 employees believed empathy in their organizations was sufficient. Companies know they must start thinking seriously about addressing their empathy deficit or risk losing workers to companies that are. Still, I've also heard from workers who think it's all nonsense, the latest in a long string of corporate attempts to distract from toxic or exploitative company culture, yet another scenario in which employers implore workers to be honest and vulnerable about their needs, then implicitly or explicitly punish them for it. If you've read all this and are still confused about what workplace empathy actually is, you're not alone. Outside the office, developing empathy means trying to understand and share the feelings or experiences of someone else. Empathy is different from sympathy, which is more one-directional. You feel sad for what someone else is going through, but you have little understanding of what it feels like. Because empathy is predicated on experience, it's difficult, if not impossible, to cultivate. At best, it's expanded sympathy. At worst, it's trying to force connections between wildly different lived experiences. See especially, white people attempting to empathize with the experience of systemic racism. Applied in a corporate setting, the very idea of empathy begins to fall apart. Is it bringing their whole selves, to use an HR buzzword, to work? Is it cultivating niceness? Is it making space for sympathy and allowing people to air grievances, or is it leadership modeling vulnerability? Over the course of reporting this story, I talked to more than a dozen people from the C-suites of mid-size and large companies that had decided to make empathy central to their corporate messaging or strategy. Some plans were more fleshed out and self-interrogating. Some thought an empathy training available to 3 time zones was enough. Others understood empathy as small gestures, like looking at a co-worker's calendar, seeing they've been in meetings all day, and giving them a 10-minute pause to get water before you meet with them. But where did this current push for workplace empathy begin? According to Johnny C. Taylor Jr., President and Chief Executive Officer of the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, and author of the upcoming book Reset, A Leader's Guide to Work in an Age of Upheaval, it sort of started with, well, him. In the fall of 2020, he'd been hearing a similar refrain from businesses: everyone was tired. Tired of the pandemic, of stalled diversity, equity and inclusion, D&D, efforts, of their bosses and their employees. When he looked at the 2020 State of Workplace Empathy Study, then in its fourth year, the reasons for that exhaustion became clear. People were tired because they were working all the time, and trying to sort out caregiving responsibilities, and dealing with oscillating threat levels from COVID-19. But they were also tired, he believed, because there was a generalized empathy deficit. That empathy deficit became the cornerstone of Taylor's State of Society address in November 2020. Much of the resurgence of D&D programming in the wake of the George Floyd killing was supposed to encourage open conversation and mutual understanding, he said. But it often bypassed empathy. Well-meaning programs devolve into grievance sessions, rather than listening and trying to relate. SHRM is an incredibly influential organization, with more than 300,000 members in 165 countries. So while it's not as if empathy efforts were non-existent before, Taylor's speech encouraged them. Even if members weren't there to listen to his words, his message, and the data from the study, began to filter into HR departments, leaving a trail of optional learning modules and Zoom trainings in its wake. The backlash started shortly thereafter. Taylor acknowledges as much. "I see these companies jumping on it," he told me. "But it's not an initiative. It's not a buzzword. It's a cultural principle. If you make this promise, as a company, if you put this word out there, your employees are going to hold you to it." He adds that empathy should go both ways. There's an expectation that employees can mess up, employers should be able to mess up too. In the case of employees, many are frustrated by perceived hypocrisy. All employees who spoke critically about their employers for this story requested anonymity out of concern for their jobs. One woman told me her company, Viacom, has been doing a lot of messaging about empathy, particularly when it comes to mental health. At the same time, it has switched to a health plan that's more restrictive when it comes to accessing mental health professionals and care. Viacom attributes the change to a shift in policy on the part of their insurance provider and says it has worked to remedy it. Other employees report repeated invocations of empathy from upper management in staff meetings, but little training on how to implement it with those they supervise. As one female employee at a performing arts nonprofit told me, in a one-on-one meeting with my boss where I was openly struggling and tried to discuss it, I was told that mental health is important, but improving my job performance was more important. A customer service representative for a fintech company said empathy had been centered as a core value of the organization, something they were meant to practice with one another but also with customers. To quantify worker empathy, the company sends out customer satisfaction surveys, CSATs, after each interaction. It found that dips in CSAT scores, which were measured by an automated system, reliably happened when a customer had a long hold time, which had little to do with whether the representative modeled empathy. Yet employees were still promoted based on these scores. The central tension emerges again and again. There's an irony, because there's the equity that you want to present to employees, while also giving special consideration and solutions for specific situations. Joyce Kim, the Chief Marketing Officer of Genesys, which provides customer service and call center tech for businesses, told me. Those two are often incongruent. Put another way, it's hard, at least from a leadership perspective, to cultivate equal treatment for everyone while also making exceptions for everyone. If you allow an employee to work different hours, have different expectations of accessibility, or have more leeway because of an illness, how is that fair to those who don't need those things? How, in other words, do you accommodate difference while still maximizing profits? Thanks for joining us at TTS Times Wire News. Be sure to like and subscribe to get fast and efficient narrations of the latest news articles for those on the go. We upload every weekday at noon Eastern Standard Time. See you next time on The Wire, and be sure to like and subscribe.